Welcome to the Burn Bootcamp Podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Klein, co-founder and CEO, along with my husband and company visionary, Devin Klein.
And together, with our amazing team, we are going to help you push past your limits, not just physically in our gyms, but right here, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually on the Burn Bootcamp Podcast.
Together, we will take on challenges and break through barriers to transform into the best possible version of ourselves. We are more than a gym. We are a community. Your community. Let's go, Burn Nation.
Hey, Burn Nation, and welcome back to the Burn Bootcamp Podcast. I have a very, very special guest here to talk about relationships, all things psychology. She's a PhD in psychology. Her name is Dr. Morgan Cutlip. Dr. Morgan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you today. We were just having a conversation, and I just think you're going to shed light on so many things that women in particular are wondering about, but us guys should be aware of too. You're a relationship expert. You know what it feels like to kind of lose yourself in motherhood with your own family, Effie and Roy, your two children. And she's determined to help moms navigate life better. Throughout her career, she's helped hundreds of thousands of people, guys, worldwide to form and maintain healthy relationships, not only with themselves, but with their significant other as well. And sometimes we leave ourselves out of that. She does not. She will not. And it's Good Morning America. It's Teen Vogue. It's the New York Times. It's all the places. Women's Health Magazine, Loveology, The Flow, which is an app. And her new book, Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself, is available now. It's not her first book. She has other works out there to get your hands on as well. But that's what really we're going to be talking about now. It's what drew me to you. It's what I have a lot of questions and curiosity, and just I could talk to you for hours. But let's just start with how are you? What's going on in your world right now? Before we get into the real deep stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe if I missed anything that you'd like to talk about, why don't you do that?
No, that's
Okay.
a complete intro.
Okay,
It's super
good.
generous. Thank you. All right, what's going on in my world? So my husband's name is Chad. He travels every week for work, and right now we are on a 3-week stretch where he has not been home. This is the middle of our 3rd week. He has not been home at all. So that's kind of like the context of my life. I'm just white knuckling it through this season, but he comes home on Friday, which should be good. Our hamster died yesterday, so we're like navigating some of that stuff and
Poor hamster.
I know it's really sad trinket. But yeah, we're just kind of in the thick of it. My kids are 11 and 8, extracurricular city over here, and just kind of managing life, like probably the majority of your listeners.
Well, that's what drew me. One of the things that drew me into you is just that you share your own experiences in life through your lens, and what better way to connect with somebody that is giving you advice than to, take the studies that you've earned, right, and then be able to translate that into your own life and really help people, and that's what we want to do today. And so, you speaking of Chad, we connected on the fact that we both have high school sweethearts. Morgan and I met when we were 12. You guys met when you were 14 and 16, and you have to know a thing or two about connection in order to start that early and stay together this long. So
Yes.
Let's just start at what might be the foundational level, and let's define what is connection and what is it not. What is love, or interchangeably love, and what is it not?
Just that's like a philosophical eternal question, huh? that we're all trying to figure out. So, in the work that I do, so I used to work with my dad. I know that you mentioned this when we were chatting before we got on here, but I used to work with my dad for a really long time, and he is in the same profession and has his own book and has tons of courses and been taught to like millions. I've been doing this a long time, and early on in his work, he actually developed a model. It's in my first book, Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself. It's a model of attachment. And so that's what I would say a relationship is, or love is. So a love is a series of connections that help you feel some sort of bond with someone else. And in that model, there's 5 areas or 5 bonds. So I can rattle those off if you want. But one is knowing. So if you just imagine a relationship, it's easy to imagine it with your partner. And the picture, let's create the picture here. So the model is like an equalizer on a stereo with 5 levels that move up and down. So you can have different combinations of each of these 5 areas. So the first is knowing. So if you just think about your relationship with your partner and you have this connection of knowing this area, it can vary in different degrees. When you're busy, my husband's been gone for 2.5 weeks. We're kind of out of the know with each other. We chat on the phone, but it's just not the same, right? So that bond is going to be a little bit lower. The next is trust. This is your kind of like your belief in somebody. This shapes your attitude toward them. When you can like, do you ever have that moment where you sort of like jump to the conclusion of maybe something your wife is doing, and you kind of fill in all these gaps, and you make this assumption, and it's like then you're inevitably you're probably wrong.
I've learned that I am wrong, and I keep it in here, and it doesn't come out of here.
Well, part of your job is to change the in here,
Okay.
to make these adjustments, but that's a whole nother conversation. But trust is really this like internal picture of our partners. It's our belief in them. It can vary very dramatically. It so dramatically impacts how we interact with them. So that can move in up or down. You can have a positive trust, negative trust, less or more. Reliance is how you meet each other's needs. Commitment is your feeling of connection, or your feeling of, bondedness. It's like that persevering aspect of the relationship, like the willpower, which you guys probably talk about a lot, which is like when you don't feel like doing something, but you still do it. That's that commitment piece. And then the last is the physical touch or intimacy. And so if you think about any relationship, when we're thinking about love or we're thinking about connection, they're going to have these 5 areas, whether it's a relationship with our kids or ourselves.
I think the way no, that's a great answer. And we love lists and we love to learn. You have a bunch of highly ambitious listeners that are here. They're ready to grow. They're ready to get better. They want your advice. They want all your acronyms, all the things you've learned. Feel free to lay them out for us. I know that we can learn conceptually better when we take complexity and conceptualize it together. So one thing I picked up on that I think is an interesting thread to pull on is the way you conceptualize trust as an internal belief. And let me get this right so we're clear here. When you say that, an internal belief, what you mean is like how you like what the self-talk is and how you define that person. Or maybe not even self, like how you might define your wife or your husband to your buddies. Is that what you mean? Like the way, like,
I'll break it down. I actually did a post on this recently. I think and people push back on this all the time, which I find so interesting. But this is, I think, such an important concept no matter what relationship we're talking about, whether it's your kids. In my book, I talk about this concept and how it relates to your relationship with your kids and also yourself, but in your partnership. So think about trust as like a mental picture we sketch of somebody we're in a relationship with. So I'll use my husband. So let's say, my example always is he leaves like these socks all around the house, okay? So there's like this factual knowledge of like socks on the floor around the house. Now I'm gonna get to sketch this picture of him in my mind around the kind of like narrative or storyline I'm gonna create about this thing. So let's say I sketch my picture of Chad as like he thinks I'm his maid, he thinks he's super selfish, he thinks that I'm just going to take care of everything. Maybe I go as far as do this thing where I'm like he's like my 3rd child. So I create this internal picture of Chad focusing in on these sort of negative aspects, and this is going to shape my belief in him, which is what we call like a trust picture. And it's going to be the lens that I see him through. It's going to be the lens that how I treat him. It's going to affect my behaviors because it's going to affect my reactions. If I see one more sock, on the floor, how big is my reaction going to be? It's going to shape all of this stuff because it's formed. However, we're in charge of how we sketch this picture. So we can make meaning of things in so many different ways. And I'm sure if you think about your own relationship, it comes through of like all the ways we make meaning of just these little tidbits of information. That is our trust picture. And so it's our job in our relationship to sketch it accurately. I like to say we have to fact check it regularly, and then we have to clean it out, or else our attitudes towards people we love can start to become super negative. And we have to shift our focus from these sort of like things that bug us to the ways that they really enhance our life. So for me, the black socks, he doesn't do it anymore. He heard me on a podcast and he thought I was upset. And I'm like, I'm not upset. I don't care about your black socks.
He's listening. He's
Yeah,
listening.
he's listening. I'm like, hey, thanks for listening, but I really don't care about them. This is not like the hill I want to die on in my relationship. But for me, the black socks are a representation of the fact that my husband's home with us. He's gone so much. Every time I pick him up, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that he's here. So that is how we use our trust picture.
Yeah, that perspective is super common too. Just like you use those two examples, but how common is it? Like, there's a story in everybody's household that fits one of those two pictures, and you're so right. It's the same perspective that we would have on like a workout. Like this workout is, it could be the best thing. Like if I do this every day, I live longer and I get to see my grandkid. Or, oh, this is such a chore, and, how dare anybody encourage me to do this crazy thing, right? Yeah.
The shortest version of it is the story I'm telling myself about. Mm-hmm. And then you fill in the gap, and that kind of gets you to, like, it reveals the sort of picture you've sketched of whatever it is, whether it's your workout or your partner.
So I'm on the same page as you are 100%. Why do people push back and steel man that argument of why they're pushing back on you?
People on social are just like wild. It's so interesting.
I mean, is this like, have you heard like a logical pushback, or is this just a troll type pushback?
It's my opinion, but I don't think it's logical. A lot of times they're like, he should pick up his socks. And I'm like, you're missing the point. You're missing the point, or so yeah. People just get all fired up about like I'm sort of gaslighting women into believing that it's okay to pick up your partner's socks. But the reality is I don't want to be in a relationship, and I don't think any of us really want to be in a relationship where we're walking around on eggshells all the time. I am not perfect. I mess up all the time. I leave cups all around the house. Sometimes I don't put the lids on things all the way, and like that's backfired in a much bigger way than black socks on the floor. So what kind of tone and atmosphere do we want to have in our relationship? And I think that's a question that we need to repeatedly ask, because we can get righteous about things, but is it really benefiting the relationship? And usually it doesn't. Of course, it's okay to ask for changes, but we have to keep these things in check.
Yeah, and I would make the assumption that maybe some people who struggle with their ability to connect with themselves and with their spouse might use that sock analogy as a way to say, oh, but you're still wrong. But can't two truths exist at the same time? Can it, I should definitely pick up my socks for sure. Like, I shouldn't leave stuff on the floor. That's, I can do better than that. But you can also not take that and use that one little piece of evidence of how I might not be organized when I've proven organization in every other area of my life, and then say, oh, you're not organized anywhere because you leave your stuff on the floor. So two truths can be there
Absolutely.
At the same time.
You can want your relationship to be better, and you can ask for changes, and you can also be gracious. And I think people sometimes miss that. It's like, it's okay to extend some grace and ease in our relationships, but also be like continually asking for growth and change and all of these things. So yes, people miss that.
So the physical touch piece of it, that is an interesting one, and I want to explore that if you don't mind, because this is like one of the needs that I would have as an individual, not just like from a biological perspective, like, men thinking about sex or whatever. To me, it's just more of an acknowledgement of awareness in the room, that I'm there, that you care about me when I'm there, that it's that you there isn't anything mentally going on, that you hold resilience or emotionally, that you hold any emotional tension with me on, because you're physically showing me that it's not there, right? And then if the physical touch isn't there, then I'm like, what's wrong?
Yes.
What's going on? What are we doing? Are we okay? And one of the biggest mistakes I've learned about myself, and maybe you can help me analyze this, is the need for, like Morgan would like to say, I have a hard day at work, and she might not be the most, like, she's usually a very upbeat, uplifted person. She might not be that one day, and then I'm like, oh, are you okay? Are you okay?
You okay with me?
Are you okay with me? Like, and it's like this ego thing of like, what am I? And then I let her mood, whatever it might be, like, instead of just letting her mood be, sometimes I absorb that, and I'm like, now needing her approval to feel happy about myself when she's got things going on right now today that she A, doesn't want to talk about because she's still processing it, and B, it has nothing to do with me in the first place. But my intrusion of her like space, or my intrusion of her intentions, I think is a good way to put, like, she's not intending to make me feel like it's my fault. Or do you
You're
know what I'm saying?
personalizing it.
Help me, help me work this out.
So, I mean, we could go deep and we could talk about attachment styles and all those things, but let's just stay like at the most practical level. This is a really common dynamic in relationships. There's lots of ways it's referred to, but there's something that I like this terminology called emotional contagion, where we sort of absorb the mood of our partner. And it's actually kind of, do you feel exhausted by this?
I feel, my feeling is uncertainty.
Yeah, like an insecurity.
That's how I feel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can feel exhausting. It can feel insecure. You can feel kind of like that anxiety or that like pit in your stomach of like, oh my gosh. I relate. I'm like super sensitive. I'm not sensitive in like I get my feelings hurt easily, but I'm sensitive in that I just absorb everything around me kind of like a sponge. So this is actually something in my own relationship that I've had to put a lot of work into. And I did an experiment with myself where I went 30 days and I tried to take absolutely nothing personally. And I actually think that relationships would be so much better off because we personalize the socks. We're like, how dare you? This is some sort of like infringement on my rights in the home. And like we personalize, and also we personalize the way that we interpret our partner's mood. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. And so this idea of sort of like you probably do some sort of like workout challenges, but can you do a challenge in your relationship where you're like, I'm going to test it and I'm going to go this number of days. I'm going to take nothing personally. My partner's in a bad mood and they're, whatever, tense, that tension you can kind of feel moving around the kitchen a little bit like in their own space and kind of like not paying attention to you. Can you say something like, hey, like, how are you doing? Like, what can I do for you? Instead of being like, are you okay with me? Because usually that actually just creates more tension in the dynamic and they get annoyed because now they got to put energy to making you feel better.
Always. Always more. Not most of the time for me. It's always like, oh, you idiot. Don't say that. That's not helpful.
Yes. And it's so hard. I totally get it. We get pulled into kind of that temperature checking. So I actually have a free guide, at least it's free right now. Maybe we can link it or something, but it's like, how do you work through this challenge of taking nothing personally for these few days? When I did it in my own relationship, I was astonished at how much better it was. Number one, I didn't carry that anxiety and that worry anymore. Number two, my Chad was like way like warmer and more affectionate and more like, he didn't need to actually feel his stress and also support mine. And so it freed him up to just give more generously to me. It was wild, the impact of that little experience. So I would just encourage people to kind of mess around with that. I also think a huge, part of this is, and this can get tricky because this can set them off, but there are also times where it's worth doing that fact checking sort of stuff. We create these narratives in our head and we can then spiral downward. Oh my gosh, maybe it's that thing I said earlier. She's mad at me. She walked by me and she didn't even touch my shoulder or like give me a hug. Like, I guess she's not into me. Like, we can start to spiral into this narrative. So it can be helpful occasionally to just say, I'm noticing that you're distant. Like, are you stressed? Or did I do something? Because I want to make sure I can support you in the way that you need. And so you sort of take the work off of them of having to reassure you, but instead kind of put out two options so you actually know how to respond and show up better when your partner's feeling stressed.
Yeah, I love that. And we'll link the link that you just explained where people can basically, this is what you did and you documented it and gave us a tool so we can use it. And it's a 30-day tool, I'm assuming.
No, it's just it just walks you through a couple steps. Like, here are the things. Here's how you get in the headspace to do it, and then try this for 30 days if you can. Even a week would make a difference. Yeah.
We love tools. Because a lot of times we get in places where we feel like we're in this whatever plateau or inability to make the adjustment in our relationship, but it's like, what strategies have you tried that are different? It's the same thing with our fitness. If you're just in this perceived plateau or you're not making the adjustment to calories in, calories out, or the type of workouts that you're doing, the load that you're, forcing your body to adapt to, then you're not going to change because the strategy isn't changing. And it's the same thing here.
It is.
Fitness, my favorite metaphor. I have a question for you. So I've noticed this a lot, and this was my experience as a child growing up. Both my mom and dad would yell at each other. It's very toxic, so this is a great extreme example. Most people aren't this way. Very toxic, very abusive, very, very violent. But one of the things I noticed is that it was always one another. They were always the problem. It was never me. There was no connection with myself first. It was always you. How do we know when we are the problem and it's not something that my spouse is doing, some grand scheme to ruin my life, or maybe it is, but how do you explore that and get to the bottom of it? There's one, I have to swear to do this quote, but there's a quote in the No Asshole Rule book that it says, if you wake up every day and you look in the mirror and you see a superstar, but everyone else are assholes, well, then you need to look in the mirror again because you might be one. So that notion, and within the relationship context, how do we navigate that? How do we identify it? And how does self-awareness play into it?
I mean, self-awareness is huge. So my second book comes out in April. It's actually in something called The Mental Load, but it's for couples. And I have 4, and it really will help like your entire relationship. But I talk about 4 areas that people need to learn how to share in their relationship in order to just work better, to share the mental load better, all the things. But one of them is to share accountability for how you show up in the relationship. Relationships are a dynamic. What this means is if you make one little adjustment in one person, naturally the other person's world's going to shift a little bit too. You're connected. And so you almost it's tricky to say this, people will push back, but almost every issue you're going to have in your relationship is an issue that was created within the dynamic. So both of you bear some sort of responsibility. It might be divided up a little differently. And I'm excluding like abuse and all these things. This is where people are like, what about abuse? And I'm like, okay, let's just take that off the table. I'm talking about relatively healthy relationships. Almost always both people play a part in the dynamic. What happens is the dynamic gets so entrenched. People get so stuck in their own hurt and their own pain and their own frustration that they start to have a difficult time seeing how they're playing a part of it and seeing the other person's perspective. And so, always almost, we need to get better at self-reflecting and seeing how we're showing up. And so part of it really is working to increase our self-awareness. And there's lots of ways of doing this. Part of it is just sort of taking a step away from that argument. You can't really do it in the heat of the moment. You kind of need to do some of this work outside of the moment. And so thinking about things like, if I'm feeling defensive, what is the need that I am maybe not getting met, or what is being stirred up in me that is resulting in this defensiveness? Am I feeling attacked? Am I feeling shameful? Am I feeling accused of letting my partner down? Sort of reflecting on some of these questions in order to examine your reactions. I mean, you can go deeper. I mean, there's things like thinking about how you saw conflict handled in your home. Like maybe this one applies to you, which is that the majority of people have grown up being told that conflict and intense conversations are a bad thing. It sounds like in your home they actually were a bad thing. So we'll do everything that we need to do to avoid these things because they don't do anything except cause pain. And so I don't know if this shows up for you, but in a lot of relationships, it's usually the woman will maybe initiate a conversation and the guy will be like, yeah, we're good. Like, I don't know why you're upset about it. Things are fine. We don't need to talk about this. And they sort of do anything they can do to avoid getting into this conversation. And so doing a little bit of reflection on your growing up experiences and what are the messages you received about conflict, how were you shown love, different things like that will start to reveal some of the own patterns you're repeating in your own life. And I always say it's like, this is the best part of being an adult, is that we can examine patterns that we sort of just absorbed in our upbringing, and we have the agency and the choice to do it differently. And so we can create any dynamic we want to create, and we can make changes, we can repeat things, but let's do it with self-awareness rather than just falling right into the same patterns.
Yeah, I hear you saying that.
Questions you're asking.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, it's great because what I hear you saying is that ultimately when you take responsibility for it, that the just the notion of taking responsibility alone is inherently powerful, because now you can actually do something about it, right? Like the dynamic relationship, it has flexibility to it, right? But it's changeable, it's plastic. Like you can actually mold it with decisions and awareness. And self-awareness is one of these like elusive things, and I always like to bring people down to just a couple questions like you are, right, on self-awareness. It's like, how are you feeling, and define that. How do you want to feel, and define that, and what actions do you need to do to help you stop feeling the way you don't want to feel? It's very simple stuff, but it sometimes can just become so what. No, it's like mental health nowadays is that same word, and authenticity became that same word. It's like these are very important concepts and notions, but we're losing them in just the sheer volume in which we're talking. You're talking about them and incorporating them across horizontally, like almost every area of society, but not going deep enough, right? To really explore it. Yeah.
Let me offer one simple mindset shift though when it comes to our relationships that I think can it's not necessarily like this deep self-awareness, but just to help couples think about their relationship in a new way, which is that our relationships always need something. I think this is it's just like, I mean, you use the fitness metaphors all day long, but it's just like how you said, you always have to kind of make these little adjustments, and you're not like, and maybe some people do, but you're like, I can't believe you work out. You actually need me to change something so I can continue to grow. It's just like, no, that's just part of it. And so I think one of the biggest mindset shifts we need to make in our relationships is the realization that life is busy, life is stressful, life works sort of against the connection and closeness in our relationship. So it will continually sort of pull us apart. Because of that, our relationships are always going to be at a deficit. So when your partner comes to you to say, can we talk about something going on? What almost always happens, it's a really normal thing, is that defensiveness comes up. What do you need from me? I'm doing so much. Instead, let's shift that mindset to be like, of course the relationship needs something. It's always, all the forces of life are working against it. It's normal to have to make adjustments. Let's just enter into the conversation with that awareness and that mindset shift. It's like the growth mindset. We have to continually think that our relationship will always need an adjustment, always need something different. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us, or that doesn't mean that's anything wrong with you as a partner. It's just a normal part of being in a relationship.
Yeah, the way Morgan and I have done that is it's because we have found to be true what you're saying, just through our own experience, and we started carving out what we call a same page meeting. And what that did was allowed us to actually have the reserved time, a block of time where we get to talk about these things, where 2 weeks before it's going to happen, you get to anticipate it, and you get to think about it, and you get to realize like some of the things that you want to talk about aren't worth it, right? Or maybe your perspective is wrong on it, and you get time for your perspective to change, and you get to think about your approach, and then you get to go execute, like game day. You get to go execute this meeting, and it's like then the hard part is saying, after you're done, is saying, how'd that meeting go?
Yeah, you gotta review tape.
you gotta review the tape. Yeah. So of course that time together to work on that dynamic is important. And I love the perspective shift that you offer up, and just saying like, yeah, of course, duh. Like, let's make that obvious that it needs something, rather than thinking everything's all perfect, because that's what our parents did. They swept their problems under the rug, and now they, you've been taught to do that your whole life, but not so useful when life is different now than it was then. Speaking of then, my next question has to do, we'll kind of go a little bit more abstract here. Something that really concerns me is the falling birth rates. Something that concerns me is, divorce kind of peaked in the 80s, and now it's still about 40 to 50%. You correct me if my statistics are off, but something like 40 or 50% of first marriages are still ending in divorce, and then as you go to second or a third marriage, it cascades up, and the likelihood of divorce goes to 70%. But and we've kind of evened off here. There's obviously so much at play with all of that, so I'll zoom into like a specific question. Why do you think there's less divorces today, but also less marriages? Right. So when you think about the marriage rate lowering, and all the things at play, how is that bad and how is that good? Like, because there's two sides of it, right? There's like Burn Boot Camp hit the pocket when it came to, business is all about solving a person's problem on time, right? And we hit the pocket when it came to providing a challenging, inclusive, positive, optimistic environment for women and their families, right, to come to in their community where they were going to get world-class service, right? It was the women's strength movement was just starting. Like, it was started, but it was just gaining like hockey stick traction. And I didn't even know, Morgan and I didn't know better at the time. It wasn't like that's what we were trying to do. It just happened to be a darn near perfect timing. So I think what I'm trying to ask you, and what I hope that the audience will take from this, is the timing of all of this, that there's duality to it, that the dual income financial instability is one side of the sword that is pushing then women having births later in life. It's pushing fertility rate, and that's pushing fertility rates down, which, there's all this complex stuff. So I just wanted to get your take on the macro and see how you think about all of these things that, in all we experience as individuals, but we're starting to see this take shape on our society and really impact the way that we look at America and the world moving forward.
Yeah, that's a really big question. And I mean, I'm just going to speak like I don't have the answers here. So this is just my opinion.
I'm just looking for opinion. Yeah, I just want your opinion.
Okay, and there's like so much nuance. There's so much nuance in the data, because we do know that women are having kids later in life. And so it's like, okay, are the birth rates declining, or do we just need to extend the timeline? And as we kind of move forward, more kids are going to come out of these older, come out later in life for a lot of these women. So there's a whole lot going on here. I mean, the cons to the declining marriage rates are that I don't believe that, I think being born out of wedlock, that's like an old school term, but like single moms having kids, is pretty high still. It actually might be at an all-time high right now. I'd have to recheck the numbers on that. It's been a little bit since I've looked. And so we are having kids still, but we're having kids outside of the family unit. And, still research shows that kids do best in a family structure. And so with two parents around. And so that is one of the major issues, is just that kids do best for the most part. And there's all, of course, nuance. I'm always so careful with these things. There's nuance to all this stuff. But of course, for the most part, in general, kids do best with having a family formation. So I guess the benefits, that's like sort of harder for me to think about, because I do think families are good for society, and they provide a secure structure for
the fact that you have to hesitate on that is like, why are we putting pressure on our professionals to have to hesitate to protect the family unit? That's a pretty silly thing. Like, isn't it obvious, right? That is. I know that it's a good thing, and it's it's just kind of sad that you would ever have to feel threatened, by that notion to even talk about it. So.
Yeah, I think, I guess you could say one of the benefits is you would hope potentially that people are being more selective about who they marry, and they're being more cautious as they're entering into the decision. So you would hope that over time research will show that we're having higher quality relationships, and time will tell if that's the case. I know, divorce rates are going down, and so perhaps that is the case. But again, I just go back to, but if we got a lot of kids without two parents, that is potentially going to have a detrimental effect on society in terms of the people they become, their education, their income issues, and the financial burden that offers. So those are some of my thoughts. You can ask me more specific questions. I think there's a lot going on. I think in one piece is that I think women are sort of raising the bar of what they're expecting in their relationships, and this isn't all bad. However, we're seeing women leave their relationships at pretty high rates. They're initiating divorce at higher rates. And so there is a sort of pressure on men I think, in some ways, to sort of step up the emotional skill set game. But also, I have a lot to say on this. I'm totally censoring myself a little bit. But I also think that as we raise our standards, we are sort of maybe shutting out the potential to have really high quality relationships, because we're expecting like all of these things in a partner that maybe would develop over time in the relationship and not always before.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've seen at Burn anecdotally is what we do is we empower women to take control of their lives. All people, right? But Burn, it's our very first tagline was Charlotte's Fit Community of Moms. We have been here, for mom, wanting to help the staple of the household, the gear that turns our lives. Like all of us men would be lost, or women would be lost without that motherly figure, the matriarch in our life. And so to me, it's like I've seen that empowerment translate to relationships, just to be able to stand up stronger and with a bolder stance. And I would like to think that empowerment has, building of confidence is maybe a more precise way to say it, is that when you build somebody's confidence through repeated actions like doing a pull-up when you were terrified of pull-ups beforehand, right? Doing your work when you never wanted to look at yourself in the mirror beforehand. Doing that leads to more positive outcomes in your life as an individual. And if one of the things that burdens your life is an abusive, a toxic relationship that, and you and I both know, like, you can't turn back from, there's no turning back from a certain level, right? There's only that decision just to leave or not, right? Stay suffering or leave. And I've just seen a lot of that. And I'm sure that you have too in your work. Have you noticed a trend of kind of confidence being correlated with the ability to stand up, have a voice, and just move on when it's time to move on? I guess that would be an argument. I'm sorry, but that would just be an argument for why the divorce rate could be good, right? I'm trying to get both perspectives.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing I live in this little social media bubble sometimes, and I'm seeing a lot of people come out how they're leaving their relationships and things like that. And so I have a very I have a very nuanced perspective on these things, and so I can kind of swivel around and around. So I know I've gotten stronger throughout my marriage, and there's times where there's this tension, right? Because I'm I'm growing, I'm getting stronger, get on the same page, buddy, right? We can feel that sort of tension. And I think that if I were in a relationship with somebody who's abusive, I feel like anytime it's abusive, you gotta go. And so getting stronger and getting empowered enough to leave, that's a good thing. So let's set that aside. But just in general, getting in a relatively healthy relationship, the woman starts to get stronger. I think a lot of times when we start to grow, the discrepancy between us and our partners feels that much bigger. And so we're how come you haven't joined me in this? You need to level up. I've leveled up. Where are you? And I think that tension, and I'm drawing some conclusions, making some assumptions, of course, but I think that tension sometimes results in people just leaning into the irritation and the frustration and it creates this narrative that their partner kind of sucks and that they are a child and that they're not doing their part and so it empowers them, yes, but to the point where they just can't see their partner as anything but not good enough, dragging them down, holding them back, and they're leaving their relationships. And I think there is a subset of the population where this is the story, and that's the story that I sort of am I don't know if that's a great thing. What about the idea that our relationships are a safe structure to promote change? Because when we're in a relatively healthy relationship, our job is to sort of look at things and to make adjustments. And so can we stick around a bit to be there alongside our partner as they're kind of growing up? I think women often, if we look historically, we are the leaders of a lot of change in society, but not everybody arrives at the same time. And so is it good for our society? Is it good for our families if we're just peace out, you're not doing your part? Not always. Caveat, sometimes, right? Sometimes there are these partners that the women are I have tried, I've done the things, I've said, why don't we go to therapy? Why don't we do this stuff? And the partners are like, I'm not doing it. And so then they are in this pickle where it's like, okay, either I stick around and I am chronically dissatisfied and unhappy, or I'm going to leave. And so we've got that too. So it's just a big conversation that's super nuanced, but I see what you're talking about. I see happening in different sects of society. I think the data is showing that some of these sort of like big shifts are occurring in our relationships.
Yeah, and even if you took off like the top 10%, let's say, best relationships, if you can define it that way, and then you lopped off the bottom 10% of abusive relationships, and you took everything in the middle, I think it's if people can't see that that's the lens that you're talking through, then let me be very clear that you're not taking like an outlier and then giving general advice on some outlier case. That would be silly. But I do, when you're talking about the middle 80% and what most people are going through, it is this: I'm growing, you're not growing. I'm ambitious. I want to learn a new language. I want to start a business. I want you to read, right? And it becomes this thing of like, here's what I'm doing over here on one side, so then therefore you should too. And from my experience in talking with people, it is probably not the best thing on this 80% middle of the cases. It's not the best thing to have expectations of somebody else to do the things that you would want them to do, rather than just existing next to them side by side and allowing it's part of that conversation we were having earlier about approval, right? Like, the reason I would need your approval is because I feel your expectations. And so am I meeting your standards? So can you talk about that, expectations, and then we'll finish up with talking about your new book, because I know that we haven't talked much about the kids. We've been focused on the relationship thus far, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point, which is like, and this is, I've seen this too, sort of like, I'm leveling up, therefore this becomes the new expectation of you. And so we project that onto our partners. And the further our reality is from our ideals or our expectations, the more frustration and discontentment we're going to feel in our relationships, whether it's with ourselves or with our partners. And so it has and then we start to only see them as falling short of these expectations. And I see this, and this is not a knock, I'm just kind of like calling this out. I see this a lot, is that we as women, especially because we tend to manage the home and family life, we sort of like set the pace for what we think how things should go and what they should be. And we're like, this is our we set the standards a lot of times for things. And I think that it's great because we do a good job. And it's great because we're like leveling up and we're doing these things. But then also, I think there needs to be this other piece of sort of humility and some grace. Not everybody works at the same pace. Just because we said it so doesn't mean that's the way it works for everyone else. There are differences between men and women and how we do things. And so it's important for us to bring our expectations out into the air, put them out in the open, put them on the table, and we need to examine them. And it can be helpful to examine them together. Talk about these, and it's our responsibility then to make some sort of adjustments to our expectations. We can lighten up on these expectations. We can kind of let them go, which sometimes when we let go of these expectations, that's when we see the growth in our partners. Because who likes to grow when they have like somebody hovering over them, calling out how they're continually falling short? That's just not a conducive environment for personal growth and development. Nobody likes to have their hand forced to do these things. Or the other alternative, which we're seeing too, is just like you can ask somebody sort of level up to meet your expectations. But it's really important to identify them. It comes back to that self-awareness piece, because when you identify them, then you can decide how you relate to them. And a lot of times we do need to make some shifts.
So if I extrapolated your expectation philosophy, then I could say that no expectations would be the best environment for the other individual to grow. Like if I didn't impose any expectations and only let you then have the expectations that you've conjured up for yourself, that's a good thing or that's a bad thing. And when it comes, when what is on the line is this person growing. If I'm growing and I don't see them growing, do I tell them, hey, I'm growing and you're not growing? I expect you to do X, Y, and Z. Is that fair? Okay, that's fair. Got it. And we're on the same page. Or is it better just to say, hey, I'm doing this, this, and this. These are the expectations I have of myself. And I don't need anything from you.
Yeah, it's not realistic, actually. I think that the way that we assert our expectations is going to dramatically affect things. I'm not a black and white person. It'd be so much easier if I was, because then I can just be like, do this and don't do this. But, it's sort of like this blending of the two. So you've got to examine your expectations. What are they? Are they realistic? And then I think you need to talk about them. If you're like, I'm leveling up and I'm realizing that I have been this is a common one for women. I've been stuffing my needs for 10 years. And so you haven't had to meet them. And I am resentful and ticked off, but also I haven't asserted them. So it wouldn't be fair to have a new expectation of your partner that they, meet these needs and you don't tell them. And it wouldn't be fair to be like, well, I guess I'll just stuff my needs for another 10 years because that's not going to feel good. So I think it's like you've got to like, use your own thought process here in your relationship and see what's going to work. But it's our responsibility to let the people in our life know what we need. And so that's going to potentially come from some expectations. Hey, this is what's going on with me. I'm changing. I'm realizing this stuff. And I think that these are the 3 things that I need more of from you. What are your thoughts? I know this is new. And I haven't had to do this for the last 10 years. I haven't even asked for this, but now I am. And so can we work on this together? So I think part of it is actually like the approach that you bring, these things to your partner and how you talk about it with them. And then, do you give them some time to kind of learn this new thing? Like, can we check back in on this maybe in a week and see how this is going, or in a month and see how this is going? So I don't feel like I have to be, constantly harping on this one. But can you do this for me? Kind of negotiate some of this stuff together. And I think that's a big piece here is like what I see shifting a little bit in relationships that kind of like fires me up is like, it's like a 1-player game. You're married, but it's like, oh, we're each doing our own thing and hopefully it works out. And it's like, no, we're in a 2-player game here. Like, how can we work together on the same team to confront some of these changes in our lives, to deal with some of these new expectations, to negotiate things? How can we work together on the same team? And I realize there are some partners who are actively resistant to this stuff. But a lot of times this resistance, not always, a lot of times, is built up over time by certain things that occur in the dynamic. So how can you two come together on the same team and have some grace and patience with each other and see if you can make some movement before I leveled up, you're not, I'm out type of.
Right. Yeah, I love the 2-player game conceptualization. That I think gives a good analogy to, like you have to make decisions together. Yeah. Like this is so silly, but I was playing Mario Kart with my kids, and it's the same thing when you're playing the battle version of Mario Kart with your kids. You're on the same team, and it's not you versus, it's us versus the world. And
Yes.
like my family has always had this philosophy of like, hey, there's a force field around us 5, and nothing gets in or gets out of that, right? And that's part of, I think, the way that I have languaged the 2-player game is like we're all inside the force field. Nobody else ever gets in. Like it's a Klein only force field, and that gives us then at least we share an expectation, right? And I think that's been really important for us. But it is an interesting one, expectations versus approval. And you're right. It's not. I like to ask philosophical questions because I think it gets people thinking, and it. Right, and I know that you're a PhD, and you probably you're not a PhD of philosophy, so it's more behavioral sciences is your thing, and that tends to be more nuanced, and actually have answers to questions rather than philosophy just being like this giant circle. You just keep going around and around and around, but it's fun to talk. It's more fun that way.
It is fun to talk about.
So I just want to end this kind of expectation cycle with I think analogy most people can use to determine whether their expectations of other people are too high or too low. You tell me if this is a good way to. This is just what I've always observed and then thought about around Christmas time, when people give each other gifts. You see one of two things, right? You see, I give a gift out of my heart and I expect nothing else in return. Or you hear at dinner, I gave her a gift or I gave him a gift and she didn't even give me one back. And it's like, that highlights, if you're somebody that has resentment because you gave to somebody, right, and they didn't give back to you, that's probably an unhealthy way to have expectations. Versus maybe saying, hey, my expectation is that I give gifts without giving. You need to know that about me. That's my expectation. So you don't need to get me a gift. You do, sure, great. I'll love it and I'll thank you for it. But this is not why I'm giving you one. This has nothing to do with me getting a gift.
Yeah, I mean, you're just bringing to mind like people that I know, and I'm like, oh, getting lost in thought on that one. But I think it brings up an important piece around that personal accountability. We have to take time to know ourselves really well. It's a piece of my first book, the Love Your Kids book, is I have a whole chapter on how do we know ourselves deeply. And it's really important. And part of, for this specific example, what you need to know is like, am I giving right now? Expecting a bunch in return? Is my giving going to feel inequitable if I don't get the same amount in return? And so that requires a little bit of pause, a little bit of self-reflection, and having some self-awareness that we can cultivate over time. Otherwise, it's like you're just giving and then getting ticked off that people don't, return the amount of graciousness and generosity that you gave them. And so everybody's relationship will be better off. Your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with others will always be enhanced by an increased sense of self-awareness. Then you can make adjustments in your behaviors, your expectations, and all these other things.
And so you guys can hear Dr. Morgan talk more about this on her podcast with her father, by the way, which I think is super cool. I hope my daughter and I get to do a podcast together one day. And that's called Love Thinks, and that is your co-host with your father, Dr. John Van Epp, who is also a relationship expert, as she mentioned earlier. But I wanted you to talk about just your authoring career as a whole, and what you've been working on, what you're excited to work on, maybe some projects that you'll have in the future, where people can find them. And we've mentioned a couple things. You mentioned you're working on something. You have Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself out now. Don't you have, or am I mistaken that there's a third?
No, that was my first book, and I have a second book coming out. Yes.
Got it. Okay, so
maybe there'll be a third. Yeah.
Hey, I'm sure there will. Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself sounds great. It sounds like something I want to do.
So, okay, that book came about. So I worked with my dad for a long time, and he really specialized in helping people choose high-quality partners. So what do you actually get to know about somebody? How do you predict what they'll be like? And so I worked with him from a very young age, honestly. Like, I was traveling to conferences when I was in grade school, all the way through my academic career. And there was just one day where I remember being like, sitting in the car with him, I think after he spoke, and I said, someday I'm going to do something to serve women, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it's happening, so that's going to be my thing. And fast forward many years, our daughter Effie was born. She's 11 now, but she just turned my world upside down. I thought I was going to be absolutely like crushing it at motherhood. I could not believe how difficult it was, how unequipped I felt. Talk about expectations. I had really high expectations of myself, and I felt like I was falling short regularly. So I knew at that moment, okay, if I'm feeling this way, all the education, all the things, I should know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. If I feel this way, inevitably there's a whole bunch of other women who do. And so I want to help moms with this experience in motherhood of feeling like you are so disconnected from yourself. And so my first book walks moms through an actual plan, a 5-step plan for how you care for yourself in a meaningful way. I'm not talking pedicures. I'm talking like deep change that you can do right alongside your kids. And so the takeaway, one of the big takeaways is kind of what you and Morgan do, but it's with yourself, which is how do you regularly incorporate these self-check-ins throughout your day? And I give them a framework, like here are the 5 areas you scan. How do you do this so you can make small adjustments, or at least you can define what you need, come back to it later. So that was book 1. And then book 2 is on something called the mental load. It's called A Better Share, how couples can tackle the mental load for more fun, less resentment, and great sex. And the mental share is how couples deal with the overwhelm of responsibilities in the home and family life that predominantly fall on women. And I do believe this is a big part of the angst we're seeing women experience in relationships, is they feel like they manage all of the things and their partner is like oblivious or not taking initiative. And so it's a book that really helps couples find a plan for navigating this differently and being able to talk about this stuff without hardship Olympics or the defensiveness coming up that we see so often, usually from the men. I collected data on over 500 women for this book. I interviewed men, I interviewed women, and so I'm really excited about it. It's already available for pre-order. Hoping it really, really helps couples tackle these things as a team on the same page, because it's you versus the world, the stress, the amount of things we're trying to get done, the amount of pressure we feel to be productive all of the time. So that's the next book. I'm super pumped about it. Can I tell about one more thing?
Please.
Okay.
Love to.
I'm like, how long can I go? Okay.
Yeah.
The last thing. So I'm working on building out some new offerings that really meet couples where they're at. Because we're just living at a time that we are all we're like in time famine. We're stressed. We're like, work on a relationship when? So I have a course called Spark. It's an audio course. I don't think there's anything else like it at this time, at least, where there's 10 exercises, and it's not a challenge. It's not like, here's how you greet each other at the end of the day. It actually addresses some of the biggest pain points in relationships. It will result in meaningful change, easy shifts. They're less than 10 minutes a piece, but I recorded each exercise separately for men, separately for women. Same content, different way of talking about it, because we have different perspectives. And so what's kind of cool about it, super low price point, it's so accessible for couples, it will make a big difference in their lives. What's so cool about it is that one of the hard parts about counseling, one of the hard parts about relationship courses, is that you got to like sit there together, and if one person's kind of ticked off about stuff, it's like, see, you're not supposed to do that, right? There's that like intensity of like getting called out
But I thought we were in the nest. I thought we were in the tree trust nest of trust. Are we not in the nest?
You're like, see what they said, you do that. Like, you're the jerk. It's your fault. But when you can listen on your own time, it's that lowering of that defensiveness, so then you can come together later and talk about what you heard and what insights you have, and I give a framework for how to do that. But I'm excited about that, because I do think and I've heard from couples just how powerful it's been for them.
Well, good. If you guys love what Dr. Morgan has to say here, then you can go to her website. This is where you want people to get the Spark, and this is where they could get the book as well, or would you rather have them order the book on Amazon?
Probably, so Love Your Kids Without Losing Yourself is available everywhere. It's at lots of Targets too, so you can just Google it, go on Amazon, go on my social media, which is Dr. Morgan Cutlip, just one word. You can find links to everything there. That might be the easiest spot.
We're going to how about we'll just make this easy? We're going to add all the links in the show notes,
Perfect.
okay, to all the things. And so whether you're on YouTube in the description, y'all, or in Apple Podcasts or Spotify in the show notes, please go support Dr. Morgan Cutlip. Thank you so much for being here. You are a wealth of knowledge. I could talk to you forever and ever and ever, but we also have a company to run, so we got to go do an interview, I think is my next thing here I got going. But it's nice to meet you. I hope that will be a friend of Burn Boot Camp, and and continue doing what you're doing. You're a light in the world. We need you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to talk with you.
All right, everybody. We'll talk to y'all later. See you later.